Greetings, gaming citizens. Mike here. I've been on a binge of monthly charge programs lately, with my most recent conquest being subscription services. Now that I gave my bank a heart attack, it's time to make my family equally concerned about my financial well-being by burning even more money per month on gaming-related services. Because who gives a f*** about touching grass in 2022? Yes, I'd say I'm on track to be the first ever white guy with brown hair and glasses who complains about Nintendo games to be fascinated with financial debt. Today, we're talking about massively multiplayer online games, or MMOs for short. Before I jump into that though, I want to point out a discrepancy I hear about these games from time to time in the gaming community. You see, it's sometimes up for debate what defines an MMO. Usually people think of the big ones like World of Warcraft, but the definition of an MMO is much broader if you just think about what it actually means. The acronym stands for Massively Multiplayer Online, so it's safe to say that any game that allows a ton of players to all play the same thing online with co-op capability can be considered an MMO. While you can grind your way through Final Fantasy XIV Online by yourself, it's still an MMO since hundreds of thousands of players share the same world. MMOs also aren't exclusive to the RPG genre either. While the biggest MMOs out there are indeed RPGs, where you increase your stats and equip all kinds of gear and go on adventures and quests, I would go a step further and say that games like Fortnite can be considered MMOs. I mean, at the Game Awards, there's a category for Best Ongoing Game, which is basically what an MMO is from a grassroots perspective. It's quite literally an ongoing game. Holy shit, is that Jeff from Among Us? While I won't be focusing on games like Fortnite for this video, I acknowledge that this is a reasonable argument that can be made in terms of what an MMO actually is. MMOs go back a lot further than I initially thought when writing this video, which I'm starting to notice is a trend whenever I research anything about this damn industry. It turns out MMOs didn't even start as MMOs. Going as far back as the 1970s, there were these programs called MUDs, or multi-user dungeons. These were multiplayer real-time virtual worlds, but they were text-based, with the first widespread one being Colossal Cave Adventure, created by Will Crowther in 1975. Based on his previous hobby of caving, combined with inspiration from his involvement in the ever-popular tabletop game Dungeons & Dragons, Colossal Cave Adventure involved users entering two-word commands to encounter a result, displayed via on-screen text. A majority of the world building came from his knowledge of cave exploration, with these locations in the game resembling that of the Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. Obviously, this is a far cry from what we experience as online multiplayer today, but it's incredible how far that technology has come. When you think about it, in some way or another, online multiplayer games can be traced back to MUDs like this one, which is impressive to me. Jumping forward a bit, the first graphical MMO was Air Warrior, released in 1986 on the Genie platform. For those not in the know, before the World Wide Web became the universal internet tool it is today, we had Genie, which stood for General Electric Network for Information Exchange. Network-based applications were utilized through this service, including international banking and email services. Air Warrior was what I like to call the grandfather of flight simulation games. I mean, look at the UI from this game. It's safe to say every modern flight simulation game took notes from the Air Warrior series, including modern titles like War Thunder. Oh, did I mention that there was more than one game? There were actually 3 Air Warrior games. I said Air Warrior was the first graphical MMO, but what about the first MMO that was built in a 3D space? That title can be attributed to Meridian 59, which was released in 1996 on Windows. Fun fact, the producer for this game was John Hank, who would later go on to found Niantic and work on Pokemon Go, among other projects. Meridian 59 was pretty out there in terms of RPGs at the time. Instead of leveling up your character in the traditional sense, you leveled up all of your skills individually. Wouldn't be that big of a stretch to say it inspired games like RuneScape, which would go on to embrace this style of character progression. Not long after Meridian 59, MMO games started really gaining traction, with the likes of Everquest and Ultima Online popularizing the genre in the 1990s, with Everquest notably making the most strides at the time, as it is referred to today as one of the greatest video games ever made. After researching the legacy of Everquest, I was confused at first. This game has you level up with experience points as you traverse a fantasy-style world and gain power and spells. From a gameplay perspective, it felt like any other major MMO currently out there. However, I've concluded that it's precisely that which made it so highly regarded. I mean, think about it. In the 90s, you had similar experiences with the likes of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest on consoles like the PlayStation. But what Everquest brought was the ability to play in the same world with thousands of other people. You could join player guilds, which was a new concept then. You could do roleplay. You could duel other players. Reviews from the time this game debuted said it was the best game in its class, and that it's the most immersive and most addictive online RPG to date, among other glowing statements. Despite mainly being on PC, MMO games were expanding to consoles as well around this time. With the turn of the century, Dreamcast owners in Japan could play Phantasy Star Online. Releasing to massive success, Phantasy Star Online was the first ever online RPG for consoles and quickly solidified itself as a significant step forward in multiplayer dungeon crawling experiences, like the Monster Hunter series. Despite Sega jumping ship from console development, support for Phantasy Star Online didn't slow down as it was ported to Windows, GameCube, and Xbox. Phantasy Star Online would go on to have over 270,000 registered users worldwide by May 2001 and would have multiple updates in the form of version 2, which had improved features and new content, episodes 1 and 2, which were ported to GameCube and Xbox and featured new content, and Blue Burst, which was a Japanese exclusive port of episode 1 and 2 that had another episode of new content. Despite having tens of thousands of concurrent players, PSO started shutting down servers for all the ports from September 2003 all the way to December 2010 until nothing was left online. Since then, private servers have been utilized by enthusiasts who still wish to experience the game and have garnered a cult following. With the legacy of Phantasy Star Online, it's safe to say many games would follow in its footsteps. One of the biggest MMOs to date is EVE Online, a space-based MMO that literally made history with its staggering in-game economy. In 2013, EVE Online was exhibited in the Museum of Modern Art with a video meant to show the average day in the universe within the game. Eat your heart out, Starfield, because EVE Online has a breathtaking 7,929 solar systems with 67,253 planets and 342,170 moons, as of May 2015, when it was solidified as a permanent exhibit. These are numbers that games like No Man's Sky couldn't possibly hope to achieve, and this was all the way back in 2003. Without considering the scale of the world itself, the economy within EVE Online set a standard for MMOs that followed, as the value of the starships manufactured in the game was worth 2.7 trillion ISK, the game's currency. There are player-built corporations, alliances, and there's literal wars that happen. To this day, I've yet to find a single game that even comes close to replicating the impact on the scale that EVE Online demonstrates. The 2000s were an incredible decade for MMOs, as the world was introduced to the likes of EVE Online as well as other popular games like World of Warcraft, which has gone on to become one of the most recognizable games in the genre. Trust me, the South Park episode about World of Warcraft didn't exist just because the game was average. It was clearly more than just a funny jab at gamers, and that my therapist told me to watch because he figured I could relate to that episode. Still haven't recovered. With the explosion of MMO games in the 2000s, these games showed us what made an MMO good, but at the same time showed us how easily God can take away anything he gives us. I was originally going to say that an MMO shutting down for good is probably one of the biggest tragedies known to man, but Wikipedia has taught me that some terrible shit has happened in the past 20 years. Those of you who have been around since the very beginning of my channel will remember my background in gaming started with MMOs. Unfortunately, my taste in MMOs involves games with the shelf life as a fine milk. That said, if you want to see a remaster of that series of videos, let me know in the comments down below. While you're down there, hit the subscribe button, because a sub to the channel would be long-lasting. Hopefully. LEGO Universe is one of my go-to case studies for MMOs not existing for a long time. Only lasting from 2010 to 2012, you could sneeze and miss the entirety of this game. There was nothing particularly wrong with LEGO Universe as a game. The gameplay involving LEGO building and the world exploration was fine enough. No, the game closed because it didn't make enough money. Now, you might be thinking, isn't LEGO the biggest toy brand in existence? How did they not have enough money to run the game for more than 2 years? Well, you see, when you give anyone the ability to construct any structure they wanted with LEGO blocks, you can imagine the first thing people would do with that kind of freedom. Yes, one of the reasons LEGO Universe closed was because hiring people to moderate the Dick sculptures was expensive. Then you come across games that last way longer than you'd expect. Toontown was an MMO developed by Disney and released in 2003. The game involves you training up gags based on the slapstick comedy of cartoons and defeating the robot cogs from making everything boring and businesslike. Ironic that a game revolving around keeping things fun and happy instead of corporate and bland was created by Disney, but I'll save that whole spiel for my college thesis. The game went on for 10 whole years, giving players new things to do each year like gardening, racing, and headquarters for the 4 different variations of the cogs. Now I need to ask, how in the ever-living did this game last 10 years? Like, I don't mean any disrespect towards this game at all, but it is genuinely surprising that Toontown went for as long as it did. The combat was incredibly simple, and your means of upgrading your inventory of gags and accessing high-level areas was extremely grindy. Not only that, but it has a dedicated community that has kept the game running for the past 9 years since the original shutdown. In addition to keeping the old game running, they add new updates, and there are even other private servers, like Corporate Clash, that completely reworked the entire game. The amount of dedication from this community is impressive. If this is interest to you by chance, and you want to give this old game a try, links to the 2 biggest Toontown fan servers rewritten in Corporate Clash will be in the description down below. Then you just have those MMOs that are still somehow going, and you wonder how. Wizard 101 to this day confuses me as to how it's remained so popular. As of February 2022, Wizard 101 still has hundreds of thousands of daily players with 2.9 million total registered users. Maybe I'm being overly judgmental. Let's take a look at the game and see what it offers. Released in September 2008, Wizard 101 currently has 18 unique worlds that boast their own unique themes, each with a main storyline, a cast of characters, and side quests. The gameplay is card-based, requiring players to build a deck of spell cards to attack and boost their stats. The gameplay allows for up to 4 players and 4 enemies, with turns going in a circle rotation, switching between player and enemy phases. Supplemental features in this game include minigames, player housing with a variety of furniture options, PvP dueling, fishing, and pet training. Despite all of this, there are some downsides. The quests tend to be a bit generic, with a lot of them being just defeat and collect missions, but that's probably not a fair critique since every MMO has something to that degree. Some worlds feel like they drag on forever, with Krakatopia being notorious for feeling really drawn out, and it's only the second world in the entire game. The pricing alone is okay, with a month being $10 and an entire year being $80. That yearly plan is basically $6.70 a month, which is a good value for the amount of content in the game. However, the problem arises when the world you start in, Wizard City, isn't entirely free to play. You can access most of the main streets with no problem, but a few streets that include admittedly optional story content are locked behind a membership paywall. Riddle me this: why is the starting world not completely open to free players? If you're still learning the game, shouldn't you be able to do so without having a membership shoved in your face before even leaving for the second world? Now, maybe you don't want to buy a membership since your access to the game expires after a certain amount of time. In comes the premium currency known as crowns. Purchased with big boy money, among other features like hiring henchmen to help you in battle or buy boosts for your character, crowns let you buy access to a certain area of the game permanently, meaning it doesn't expire after your membership runs out. This is nice until you realize the sheer scope of the game. I did the calculations, and to unlock the entirety of Wizard 101 as of the writing of this video would be 210,520 crowns. In real-world money, that would cost $280. That price could technically be cut down a bit, because every weekend, KingsIsle, the developers, has a sale where you can buy 60,000 crowns for $80 and get a bonus of 30,000 crowns. This deal can be bought twice per account, so you can get 180,000 crowns for only $160, as opposed to the 200 plus it would cost otherwise. So if you take advantage of that deal, you would still be spending $210 on crowns to unlock the entirety of the game permanently. That is surprisingly generous. In an industry where developers like Activision could get away with charging thousands with Diablo Immortal, unlocking the entirety of an MMO for a couple $100s is on the small side. Yeah, it's still unfortunate that you have to pay hundreds if you want to unlock the whole game permanently as opposed to a membership fee, but evidently it works because the game is still getting updates with new content, so it's showing no signs of slowing down. Sometimes an MMO will generate a ton of hype before release, but then falls short in performance not too long after. Released in September 2014, Wildstar was an MMORPG developed by the now defunct Carbine Studios and published by Korean publisher NCSoft, who's most well known for its Guild Wars games. The gameplay was about what you'd expect from an MMO, with the combat being different in that moves from players and enemies were telegraphed, so you could see where an attack was going to land and move accordingly. On the flip side, you had to aim your attacks at the enemy if you wanted to even hit it, as opposed to the usual MMO combat style of auto-locking on enemies. Although auto-lock is also a feature in this game anyway, if you so choose. So, this game sounds fun, right? Seems like it got plenty of hype when it was shown at Gamescom in 2013. How did the game perform? Well, despite the average rating of 7.5 out of 10 from game journalists, Wildstar only lasted 4 years, with the closure announced for November 2018. I find this strange, as the game had glowing reviews from the likes of IGN saying it was a culmination of a decade's worth of experimentation and design, cherry-picked and enhanced, and infused with Carbine's twists and lighthearted flourish. I guess it goes to show that MMOs, even when polished and well-designed, is subject to the same fate as any other MMO game. One thing's for sure, though, it lasted longer than LEGO Universe. The last MMO I want to highlight is Final Fantasy XIV Online, which I believe is an MMO done very well. Yes, it's still the same as most MMOs from a grassroots standpoint, but I think it succeeds in areas where other MMOs fall short. The combat is fairly complex, with all sorts of hotkeys triggering different attacks and abilities, as well as a decent selection of classes to choose from in your journey throughout the game. The worlds are massive, with a multitude of areas to explore, but most importantly, you can play for free up to level 60. This is what I think makes Final Fantasy XIV stand out from other MMOs, as no other game like this gives you nearly as much freedom for a free-to-play account. The only real barrier here is that you can't access the wider market or any social features, but if you have a group of friends that play already, it's not really a problem until you hit that level cap. Usually, you'd get a couple levels and then have a paywall thrown at your face, but Final Fantasy really wants you to make sure you like the game before buying it. Plus, you can buy access to the expansions for pretty cheap as the Complete Edition goes on sale before a new expansion releases. For me, I have up to Shadowbringers unlocked on my account after only dropping $40. Despite that, however, you still have to subscribe to the game afterward. While buying the Complete Edition will give you access to those areas for the foreseeable future, you still have to pay a monthly fee to actually access the content itself. Even though that seems a bit weird from a money standpoint, I'm willing to overlook it, as Final Fantasy XIV has more than proved itself to be a quality MMO. MMOs are an interesting beast in the gaming industry. They can provide industry-changing innovation, but the shelf life purely depends on how actively the game is updated, while consistently providing players with a good reason to stay subscribed to the game. You know what else you should subscribe to? This channel if you enjoy my videos. If I'm showing up in your recommended, chances are it's destiny that you subscribe for stream VODs and other gaming content too. That's all from me. Now if you excuse me, I had to take out a loan to pay for my annual money-burning subscription because self-control is for losers.